This is 10 things in 10 minutes that are going on in the New York City scene. So let's get going. Do I have a slide here? There we go. Okay, I can see it up there at least. So 10 things in the New York City scene. Number 10 is the question of, hey, the New York City tech scene is back. I think there's always been the case, at least for a good part of this decade. There's been a little bug of Silicon Valley energy here in New York. But as things have moved through this decade, we've got some really big money at play in this city. We've got venture capitalists happening here, and that's a big deal. And now what we really need to get going is an inspirational quote. So I was on Tumblr last week and saw that a bunch of my friends had reblogged this quote from the New York City mayor in 1986. Quote, "New York is the city where the future comes to rehearse." So there's a little inspiration to get us going. So number 9, right now in New York we've got a bunch of big guys, big startup companies. It's not just little ones anymore. You guys are probably familiar, I just mentioned Tumblr. It's a blogging service that integrates a little bit of sort of Twitter-like followers. This thing is used by tens of millions of people around the world. We've got Etsy out in Brooklyn. For those who don't know Etsy, it is essentially an eBay marketplace for handmade goods. So anything from doilies to dolls to a friend of mine just ordered a painting of a pastrami sandwich from Etsy. And sites like The Ladder's a giant job site where you thought, hey, there's already Monster and there's already Hot Jobs. Who in the world can create another job site? Those guys turned into a, literally tens of millions of dollars a year business. A lot of what we have in New York, too, plays off some of the social stuff that Brad was just talking about in this introduction. This little section here is some sites that do some social good. I bet most folks in this room know meetup.com. Started by Scott Heffernan, who's a great New York City entrepreneur going back over a decade. Meetup gets people to meet up offline who have assembled online. This one's a little newer, you might not be as aware of it, but it's pretty cool. It's called Kickstarter.com. The idea is you've got a project that you need funding for, a project of any size, any scope. You go on here, you describe your project, and people actually donate money to make your dream a reality. And the project isn't actually funded until all the money comes in. So true story, I have a friend right now who wants to build a yurt made out of yarn in New Hampshire, and she's raising $8,000 on Kickstarter. She's put in about $5,000 right now, so if you guys want to give, go on Kickstarter, search for Yurt Alert. Social location and games, also really big here in New York. The biggest of all is Foursquare. I won't talk about it because Foursquare is Dennis Crowley, the man himself will be out here in a little bit to talk, but a lot of these services are about letting people know where you are, finding friends on the go, and winning points and awards for doing so. In the Foursquare space, there's a new startup called Hot Potato. The idea is kind of like Foursquare, but it's really for events. So you might create an event location, so to speak, and then afterwards, you can easily trade photos and notes and stories with folks who are at the same event. This is apropos of nothing, except I thought it was cool. A friend of mine brought it to my attention last week. It's a new thing called Megaphone. The idea is it gives you, with your cell phone, control over what's going on a billboard. So I think this could be kind of fun in Times Square in the years ahead. Of course, it's New York. We wouldn't be anything if we weren't fashionable, so there's some fashion sites here that have a lot of noise. Probably the biggest of all, I bet some folks are familiar with, is Guilt Group. The idea behind Guilt Group is pretty simple. They send you an email in the morning telling you that there's some designer products about to go on sale at noon. If you like what you see, you go on there, you buy it really quickly. Totally other end of the spectrum, this is a small site a few of my friends started called Fashism. The idea here plays to Brad's real-time idea. Let's say you're in a booth at a store, you've tried on some clothes, you're like, do I want to buy this? Do I look good? Take a photo of yourself, you upload it to Fashism. Users on the site tell you whether or not you should buy it while you're standing there trying on clothes. So you've got to have a pretty big ego, or at least be able to take some criticism. But it's a pretty well done site, and I'm pretty psyched what they're able to do with it. So what ties all this social stuff together is the social glue, so to speak? Well, I bet a lot of folks know Bitly. Even if you just clicked on a Bitly link on Twitter, basically it just makes the URL a lot shorter. But for folks who are actually doing stuff in this space, whether you're a broker or a blogger, behind the scenes, Bitly does an amazing job of tracking how people are finding you, who's sharing your links, where the information is coming from. And if you haven't really dug in, I recommend it. Other end of the spectrum, of course, it would be Brooklyn, the first borough, I guess, puffed up enough to have its own URL shortening service. This is bookly.com, which is a creation of John Butler, who created brownstoner.com. The idea here is actually pretty cool. You shorten your links using Bookly, and what he does here on this site is creates an ongoing news flow of all this news, which is all about Brooklyn. Because the assumption is if you're making your URL short on the site, that you're doing something about Brooklyn. So local URL shortening, that's kind of a wild idea. Local data, this is some of the most fun stuff going on, even if these business models are a little bit out to lunch. Here's one called Trees Near You. The idea is pretty obvious. It's pretty much every tree in New York City on an iPhone app. So what we're looking at here, it's Park Slope, 3rd Street and Park Slope. I'm looking at a Japanese Zelkova tree with a 16-inch trunk. Here's another crazy thing. These folks are using this platform called fans.in to upload sightings of graffiti around town so that people can be told, hey, graffiti's here, please go clean it up. Talking about Brad's presentation again, this one's called Yoga. What you're looking at here is a map of all the yoga and dance classes occurring around New York City right now.
Damn.
This is a thing called exit strategy, which is probably only makes sense to New Yorkers. The idea is when you're waiting for the subway, you tell it what stop you're at, and you tell it what stop you're going to. It tells you where to wait on the subway platform before you board the train, so you can exit right out the door at the other end. And this might be my favorite of all. This is not an
exit strategy.
Idea, but it really needs to be. It's called Taxi Hack. The idea is you're in a taxi, you tweet to @TaxiHack, and you've hashtagged the medallion number of the cab, and you can comment on your cab, like this thing smells, or this guy just sideswiped someone. And then you can see what other people have said about the same cab that they were in earlier.
It's pretty good.
Real estate, I got to mention some real estate stuff. Obviously, we've always had innovation in this market. Everyone in the city knows StreetEasy, our sort of homegrown Trulia. Everyone knows Property Shark. They do an amazing job harvesting data. We have Welcome App, one of the big online video players here in the city. The big guys themselves are getting into the act. Corcoran's among the firms that just put out an iPhone app, so that's pretty awesome.
That's you, buddy. That's you.
I think the idea of walking around and finding open houses on the go is going to be a really compelling idea this year. Then we got some brand new stuff. These guys are just launching here at the conference. It's called nabewise. It's a way to kind of dig in and review and get to know neighborhoods based on what other users have said, and also based on things like, is it hip or is it grimy, or does it smell? And these folks here at Naked Apartments are just one of many people who are trying to remake the rental game. Certainly renting an apartment in New York City remains a challenge for a lot of folks. These guys are trying to do an entirely different business model around it, and it's going to be fun to see how this stuff evolves. Number 2, as we count down blogs, I wouldn't get out of here without mentioning blogs, right? I won't mention them by name because that would be strange, but I think it is incredible how many of the biggest and best blogs are still here in New York City. And we really do a lot of work with ad agencies, and the way the business has been building on all sides is pretty amazing. And we're lucky to have a site like Outside In, which does this incredible job at aggregating all the local blogs together. And they're based out in a beautiful office out in Dumbo in Brooklyn. Finally, to finish up, I'm not talking about devices or applications anymore. This is just sort of places where the nerds are hanging. Obviously, here in New York, we have some of the best Apple stores in the country. That's the 5th Avenue Cube on the top, and down on the lower right, that's the brand new Upper West Side Apple store. I think it's 72nd and Broadway, which is pretty amazing in terms of its all-glass front and all-glass ceiling. Food trucks. High-end food trucks are all the rage in New York right now, and what has really made them possible is that these folks have Twitter accounts, and you follow them on Twitter, and you can find out every day where the waffle truck is, or where the schnitzel truck is, or where the dessert truck is. And because of the whole Twitter connection, it's become a big thing in the geek community. And finally, you want to hang out in a really hip tech spot while you're here in New York this week? Well, about 25 blocks south of here, down at the Ace Hotel at Broadway and 29th, there's this lobby that's sort of like, I don't know, if Harvard's library was really hip. They have this beautiful giant lobby with free Wi-Fi, and all these young startup companies in New York have sort of discovered it. And if you walk in there during the day, it's like there's 25 people running their like little 1- and 2-person companies here. And then, there's a venture capitalist over there talking to one of them and what have you. And so it's really like, that's a pretty cool place in terms of what's hot right now in New York City tech. And that's it. If you want a copy of this presentation or just want to tell me,
did you get the name of that hotel?
My email is locke@curve.com, or you can find me on Twitter.